I know what you're thinking. Matt, what on earth have you just uploaded? Top 10 movies of 95? What is this? So, 2 or 3 years ago, I had this idea where I'm like, I want to have top 10 lists for every year since I was born by the time I'm 25. So I watched a shit ton of movies in preparation, and I made pretty solid lists, I think, for pretty much every year. 2019, I think, is still a little weak. I haven't gotten around to watching that many 2019 movies. But I'm like, well, let's start making videos on this. And I made the 95 video and the 96 video. And I wrote the 97 video, but by that point I'm like, God, this is way more time consuming than I thought it was going to be. Because I wanted to put these out like leading up to my 25th birthday, which was in October. And then after making the first 2 videos, I'm like, this is way too much time out of my schedule. I can't. It's do this. It's make these top 10 lists or make regular content. And I'm like, of course I'm gonna keep making regular content. So I sort of scrapped the top 10 lists idea. But, I'd already made the first 2 videos, and I'm like, might as well get them out there since I already put the time into them. Let's put them out there. So, I figured end of the year, good time to put out top 10 lists, even if it's for totally different years. So this is the top 10 films of 1995. If these do well, if you guys enjoy them, I might try making more of the top 10 lists. Maybe. I'm not saying there won't be more. I'm saying there'll only be more if this does, really well. And it won't be all at once. It'll be gradually. I'll release 1 or 2 every couple months. So without further ado, here's the top 10 movies of 1995. At number 10, it's The Quick and the Dead, Sam Raimi's tribute to old westerns. It's not his greatest movie, but it's up there. If you're familiar with Sam Raimi's films, he incorporates a lot of fast cuts and interesting angles. He does tone it down a lot for this movie, but it's still there and, I feel, used very appropriately. It makes the film very exciting. The film is about a small western town stuck under the thumb of a ruthless businessman who demands money of the townspeople for protection. The town holds a gunfighting tournament just as a lady gunfighter, played by Sharon Stone, rolls into town. Along with Stone, the businessman himself, his son, and an unwilling pastor forced into the tournament by the businessman, and a whole host of other characters join the shootout. You can probably guess what happens from there. Really, my only criticism is how kinda cliché the story is. It is a throwback to old westerns, but there's not a twist on it like there would be in, say, a Tarantino movie. Still, it has its interesting character moments, and I think how well made a film it is more than makes up for it. Sharon Stone is not a particularly good actress, but I think this might be her best performance ever. Along with her, Gene Hackman, Russell Crowe, and Leonardo DiCaprio are in the film, all of whom are excellent actors and have the resume to show it. And I give the producers a lot of credit for casting Crowe and DiCaprio, both of whom were relatively unknown at the time. I think this might be a bit of a controversial pick. Make no mistakes, I did consider some more serious dramas, but when it came down to it, this is the movie I want to watch more than the others. It's not brilliant, but it's fun. And speaking of fun, at number 9 we've got Desparado, the follow-up to Robert Rodriguez's debut, El Mariachi, and one of the most fun, over-the-top, fast-paced action movies out there. Between this and Quick and the Dead, 1995 was the first good year for westerns since, 1969. Rodriguez is a director who's very hit or miss for me, but when he hits, he's excellent, and this is one of his best. I think a lot of people sort of write this off as just a silly action movie, but when you really consider what Rodriguez has managed to do, it's amazing. He's basically made a John Woo action movie in half the time on a quarter of the budget. This is an accomplishment of filmmaking. And look, sometimes a movie just has to be fun and well shot for me to enjoy it. I could have put some drama here, like La Haine, and Yeah, I like Lahane, but Desparado is more my style. And it's not like this film is lacking in the acting or cinematography. Antonio Banderas is excellent as the mariachi, and Salma Hayek puts in a good performance too. It's one of the best uses of Danny Trejo, mostly because he just has to kill people and look scary. Now, this is loosely a sequel to El Mariachi from 1993, and while I don't think it's necessary to have seen that one before watching this, I do think El Mariachi is the more interesting of the two movies, so I'd recommend watching that one first. There's also a third movie, Once Upon a Time in Mexico, which I also really like, but it doesn't seem to be that popular among fans of the series. Maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. For me though, the whole trilogy is a great sit, and I give them all my fullest recommendation. At number 8, we've got Heat. Heat is a bit of an unconventional crime movie. It spends a lot less time on the crime, planning, committing, and escaping, and a lot more time on the characters and their relationships. In the film, Robert De Niro and Val Kilmer play criminals planning a heist. Kilmer's wife is cheating on him and clearly isn't happy in their marriage because he's an alcoholic gambling addict. De Niro, meanwhile, has just met a girl and struggles with whether or not to bring her into his world of crime. On the flip side of the story, Al Pacino plays a cop who's tailing De Niro's gang, as he similarly deals with marital issues, largely because of his commitment to his job. This aspect makes Heat unique among the crime genre. It's not a straightforward heist movie, but it does still have those crime elements, and they're done really well within the film. The film was directed by Michael Mann, a fairly acclaimed director known for films like Collateral and Manhunter, and this is not the last we'll see of him on one of these lists. It does strike me as somewhat Scorsese-esque, maybe just because it features Pacino and De Niro. It does have a bit of a visual style, though the final moments of the film are really the standout in terms of cinematography. I certainly have my problems with it. It's nearly 3 hours long, but any characters outside the main three and their love interests are severely underdeveloped. Danny Trejo's in this movie, and he just shows up an hour into the movie with no introduction, and then an hour later rats on them because they kidnapped his daughter, who was never established. Worse yet, Natalie Portman appears as Pacino's stepdaughter, but she's in 2 scenes, and in one of them, she attempts suicide. This is a big character moment for Pacino, but it's founded on a relationship we have 1 scene of context for. I don't know, maybe there's a 4-hour director's cut somewhere that gives these characters more context, because I'm sure stuff got cut for time. But they aren't really what the movie's about, so I kind of forgive their underdevelopment. If you're looking for a unique take on the crime genre, this is my recommendation to you. At number 7, we've got Leaving Las Vegas, the movie that won Nick Cage an Oscar. Admittedly, the first time I saw this movie, I felt a little oversold on it, but I still enjoyed it. It's the story of an alcoholic falling in love with a hooker with a heart of gold, and, well, that's it. No crazy pimps, no shootouts, and no redemption arcs. There's something refreshingly simple, yet incredibly sad about it. We just get to watch 2 people who accept each other for who they are, even when they really shouldn't. You want to see Cage sober up, and you want to see Elizabeth Shue stop being a sex worker because of the harm it's doing their otherwise beautiful relationship, but it just doesn't seem in the cards for them. It's fucking heartbreaking. This is not a movie to watch to feel good. It has its moments of levity, so it's not a total downer, but it's not a feel-good picture. And Nicolas Cage absolutely earns that Oscar. Way too many actors play drunk so obnoxiously bad, but Nicolas Cage, of all people, plays not just a drunk and an alcoholic believably, he plays him perfectly as a sober alcoholic looking for his next fix, and as a strung-out drunk. I encourage any aspiring actors to study Cage's performance in this movie. And I'll give credit to whoever did the makeup, because you can tell what state he's in just by looking at his face. There's a lot to break down and dissect with this character. Early on in the movie, he all but admits he's not really attracted to the woman he's hitting on, he just wants to enjoy booze with her. Shue is also great in her role, though she's pretty obviously outshone in this film. Just from what I've said, you'll probably know whether or not this is a film for you. It's certainly not going to be for everyone, but if you're looking for a sad drama with a strong performance, this is that movie. So as a complete turnaround, at number 6 we've got Toy Story. It's Toy Story, Pixar's big debut, the first big computer animated movie. You all know Toy Story. I loved this movie as a kid, and I continue to find charm in it today. I think a lot of the animation still looks great, although some of the human kids don't work. But what really makes this film work is the story and characters. There's a good message about growing up and moving on from parts of your life. The characters are all really fun and lovable, the jokes are funny, and of course the voice acting is great. I don't think Pixar gets enough credit for how good they are at voice casting, even now a quarter of a century and several very bad movies later. They don't just pick the biggest, hippest Hollywood stars to be in their film, they pick the people who genuinely deserve the role. Tom Hanks and Tim Allen are Woody and Buzz. So much of what makes these characters work is their voices. Probably my biggest gripe is the soundtrack. Randy Newman writes very on-the-nose, not very good songs. But even then, for this film he managed to write by far his best and most iconic song, You've Got a Friend in Me. Jesus God, I'm gonna cry just listening to this. Of course, I could gush about this movie all day, but you guys already know. It's Toy Story. At number 5, we've got The Usual Suspects, a crime thriller starring Kevin Spacey as Verbal Kint, a petty criminal with a limp that gets caught up with several other small-time crooks in a plot to steal money from Kaiser Soze, the most notorious crime boss in the world. The story is recounted by Kint in incarceration after the plot goes wrong. The Usual Suspects has become very well known and imitated among crime movies, and for very good reason. Not only is it an incredibly suspenseful piece, it plays around with a lot of ideas like an unreliable narrator, and has one of the most well-known, highly praised twist endings of all time. It's also incredibly well acted. It won Kevin Spacey an Oscar, and, along with Seven, helped establish him as a household name. All the other performances are great too, with maybe the exception of Benicio del Toro. He plays a character with this weird, hard-to-understand accent. I don't know whose idea that was, but it's the most annoying part of the film. Don't worry, I'll praise Benicio for a lot of movies later on this month. And there's even a cameo in this film from Paul Bartel, so that's cool. Chances are good you've at least heard of The Usual Suspects, so if you haven't checked it out, I say do. And at a very similar note, at number 4 we've got Seven. Seven is the film debut of David Fincher, one of the greatest directors of all time, assuming you don't count Alien 3, a film Fincher has completely disowned. And for as much as I like David Fincher, I think he has very few movies as good as this one. A lot of people compare this film to The Usual Suspects, and I get why, but ultimately I think Seven is the better film for 2 reasons. The first is just the aesthetic. Seven is a gross, creepy movie, and Fincher does such a good job with the atmosphere. It's a crime thriller, yet it's genuinely scarier than a lot of horror movies. The second is the ending. While I like Usual Suspects twists, it does play a lot better if you don't know the twist, despite the twist being very popular and frequently parodied after the film's release. Seven kinda has a twist, but it's still thoroughly enjoyable either way, because even if I told you what happens, you'd still be shocked when it happens. The story is great. 2 cops are tracking a serial killer, killing victims he sees as committing sins in ways reminiscent of the 7 deadly sins. And at each scene they find something more terrifying and depraved than the last. The movie stars Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt, and Kevin Spacey, all of whom bring so much to this film. God damn it, why did Kevin Spacey have to be such a good actor? I'm gonna have to praise him like every other year in these videos. To be clear, fuck Kevin Spacey for being a child molester, but damn he's good in these movies. As for Seven, I could not recommend this film highly enough. It is kinda gross, so I get why some people might not be into it, but everyone I've showed it to has absolutely loved it. Moving on, at number 3, we've got 12 Monkeys. From visionary director Terry Gilliam, 12 Monkeys is one of the greatest time travel movies ever made. It is also, by my estimation, probably one of the least contradictory. Not that that matters too much to me, that's not what makes this film great. For starters, Gilliam's always been great with visuals. This film is quite reminiscent of his earlier work, Brazil, which is probably his best movie. It's not as jarring or visually wacky as Brazil, but it clearly has moments of that. The cinematography actually gets more standard and less weird as the film goes on, sort of reflecting the state of mind of the two main characters. In the film, humanity gets stuck with a deadly disease in the near future of 1996, but not long after they develop time travel. While they can't change the past, they send prisoners like James Cole to collect information to help with developing a cure. After James is arrested and charged as insane for ranting about the future and time travel, he meets Dr. Rayleigh, who at first wants to help him with his apparent delusions, but quickly finds he might not be as crazy as he seemed. As she begins to believe his story, the cinematography starts to stabilize, and everything begins to fall into sharper focus. The story is really fascinating to follow. There's plenty of suspense and misdirection in the film. The twist in the end, I think, is one of the most compelling parts, and brings up a lot to talk about. But I won't, because that's a spoiler. Bruce Willis does a great job as James, and Brad Pitt gives us one of his best performances. He's playing a crazy character, but the character never seems too goofy or unrealistic. He genuinely seems like some whacked out guy on the edge. There are some issues with the film, a minor plot contrivance or two, a bad effect or two, but it's all pretty negligible. Overall, it's some of Terry Gilliam's finest work. At number 2, we've got Kicking and Screaming. When I first saw this movie, I was a soon-to-be college graduate, and a lot of what happened in the movie landed with me. But I was worried it was just biased towards my situation. So, almost a year ago now, I was on the Duckcast podcast, and I was asked to recommend a movie. And after thinking about it, I went with Kicking and Screaming. Not the fucking Will Ferrell movie, the Noah Baumbach one. If you think I'm recommending the Will Ferrell movie, you're stupid. Upon a revisit, the flaws did become more apparent to me, but one thing stood out to me, and obviously to Duckcast member Zach as well. This movie is fucking infuriating to watch. Now there's a catch to that. Zach didn't like the characters that much and ended up hating the movie, which I find understandable, but I find these characters so deeply relatable. They're all different, and yet they all inhabit some part of my psyche. Thus, when I get mad at them, the person I'm really getting mad at is myself. Kicking and Screaming is about a group of college buddies who graduate and then spend another semester on school campus doing everything they can to avoid moving on with their lives. They do nothing of particular importance for large parts of the movie, but that's the point. I never find it boring, partly because I think their dialogue is really hilarious and relatable, but partly because there is something going on. In every scene, they're building to something, it's just not on the surface. Now, maybe you agree with Zach, a lot of people seem to, and I absolutely understand. But to me, this is a deeply personal film. I recognize that doesn't make it for everyone, but it makes it a lot to me. And finally, my number 1 favorite movie of 1995, Before Sunrise, the greatest romance movie of all time. Followed very closely by its 2 sequels, which I will be talking about in their respective years, and also When Harry Met Sally, but that's from 1989. Before Sunrise is the story of an American tourist and a French girl coming back from her grandmother's who meet on a train and spend one night in Vienna walking around and talking, which doesn't sound like much of a plot. Here's the thing, I like movies with plots where things happen. I tend not to like these slice-of-life character studies where nothing happens, but I love everything director Richard Linklater does. He somehow makes characters in situations I find really fascinating and relatable. He injects a lot of his own philosophy into his movies, and that goes double for the Before series. It just seems so deeply personal. He's also great at filming it all in a beautiful way and getting really great performances out of his actors. Ethan Hawke and Judi Delpy have brilliant chemistry, and their romance is so believable. There's also an edge of mystery to the ending that made me wait over a year to check out the sequel. I almost didn't want to know. Of course, I did, and revisiting the film after seeing the whole series, it's just great to see how many things Linklater managed to reincorporate into later films. Actually, not long ago, I found myself in kind of a similar situation, and it made me realize what works about this story. Both characters are essentially strangers. They only know as much about the other person as they've told them, yet something about them being strangers makes them more open and honest with each other. Because if you fuck up, if you make them upset or vice versa, it's not like you've ruined some long-lasting relationship or having to deal with people you know taking sides. So you can just say what you really mean. Maybe that's how love should be. What do I know? I think the greatest praise of this movie is how it made me, someone who doesn't like romance or movies without a solid plot, call it one of the greatest movies ever. And that is why it is my favorite movie of 1995.